Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz and this is episode 72. Hey artists, it's okay to be an entrepreneur with Brian Witkowski. Singers often have the mentality that if they go to the audition and don't get the gig, they have failed. Choral directors often feel that if someone doesn't hire them for the tenure track or get chosen by some other organization to do the honor choir gig, then they have sufficiently been told no. This is not your career. This is not your success domain. The happy reality, though, is that this is a mindset you can choose or reject. Being an entrepreneur simply means rejecting the who's going to let me posture towards the world and adopting more of a who's going to stop me mindset. So I sit down with Brian Witkowski, who is the founder of the Lucrative Artist, to discuss this anti-entrepreneur bias sometimes that we suffer from inside of the classical musical world, and where it came from historically, and how to break out of it, giving yourself permission and tools to earn from the value that you create for others. I think you are going to find this episode practical and helpful, and I hope you enjoy it, so stick around. One interesting thing about the Choralosophy podcast is that it is completely independently produced, meaning there is no organization, no institution, no foundation behind this show or behind this production. There's no company, nothing. It's all supported by listeners and listener involvement. The most direct way that you can do that is through Patreon. At patreon.com/Choralosophy, you can join a subscribers only environment where I put extra content, meaning a behind the scenes episode every month, supplemental materials. The people on the Patreon get to see who's coming on the show ahead of time, which means they can put bugs in my ear ahead of time about what I should ask the person about. All kinds of fun perks. There's even an awesome Choralosophy hat and t-shirt. There's all kinds of fun ways to do that over at Patreon. Now, it's an important thing because if you enjoy this show, the couple thousand or so people that tune in on a regular basis to this show, if 10% of you were to join the Patreon, it would change the game for my ability to make this production better and better over the course of the next year. So producers, there is a producer level that you can opt into over there as well. The Patreon producers are Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Okay, everybody, I am here with Brian Witkowski, and we are going to kind of dive into some of the things that musicians and artists oftentimes need extra help with in terms of financial literacy, entrepreneurship, building the kind of the business portfolio side of our career. So this is an education, I think, that is oftentimes lacking in our artistic upbringing and our artistic background. So Brian, thanks for being here to shed some light on it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So why don't you first start just by sharing a little bit with the audience who you are, just to give them a frame of reference and where you come from, and what is your connection to the artistic community and financial side of things? How does this all come together in your life?
Yeah, it's a long, interesting story, but I'll do my best. Basically, when I was a kid, I was in choir, as in church choir when I was a little kid, and singing was kind of like my saving grace. I'm in a family where I'm the only boy, so by default, you're like the bad kid in some ways. Especially when it turns out you're like your most vocal grandparent is kind of, also has no brothers and no sons. So it's kind of multiple generation. You're the first boy. And it was interesting growing up, but the choir is my saving grace. And I was basically growing up and, did the usual things, college preparatory wise, and decided to become a music major because I'm good at it. Right. And my dad was a professor and I got to see him get his doctorate. And he told me I'd also get a doctorate too someday. So behind me is that on my wall, my doctor of musical arts degree. And I more or less went about life expecting just to get that degree, you're guaranteed full-time employment, right? And it's kind of, we're in an interesting world where more and more people are doubling down on that idea and it's more and more competitive. So what else do we do? And so, I've had some experience. It was actually 10 years ago, I got my doctorate, and then I've had a roller coaster life doing some different stuff, doing a lot of different kinds of performing eclectically, professionally and professional choirs, operas, musicals, and so forth, and did some corporate jobs and trying to figure out that tenure track wasn't quite coming. So what else am I going to do? How can I be of service? And 6 years ago, my father passed away and inherited enough money to feel rich for a moment as an artist. But then I thought I could afford to be a starving artist. And it kind of all went away quickly, let's just say. And, trying to figure out, okay, what is going on here and what, my issues were and what other, kind of common things we have going on. And, we all have problems with money mindset. Our relationship with money is challenging as an artist because there's, so much shame and guilt around having it. if you have some, then you're kind of like, you feel guilty and you have to spend more to help everybody else who has none. And it's almost that race to the bottom mentality when it comes to, we think we're in a supply and demand situation strictly with labor as singers, and we think we're all competing for the same thing. And so it's like we find ourselves so much easily, agreeing to things that don't pay enough, stand for the truth of our values. So, how can we foster a new kind of culture where we're actually getting paid more and we're, making it a virtuous thing, not this shame and guilt thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So did you so after the DMA, by the way, that and hanging on your wall, is that in voice?
Yeah, vocal performance. So,
Vocal performance.
you know,
Okay. So yeah, so you're kind of coming at this from mostly from the performer's angle, right? So
yeah,
the kind of you're wanting to be thinking and be exploring ways that performers, singers, but artists in general can build themselves a portfolio career, but also do so by maximizing their value in the market and all of those types of things. Is that kind of what you're doing now then?
yeah, helping people with their mindset, brainstorming new income opportunities, and realizing that, there's not people just like us out there who are our customers. There are other people with, you know, they're used to spending large amounts of money on the right package proposition, and there's no shame in asking for that price. And a lot of people who are working like as voice teachers and in other capacities, we undercharge, and sometimes we're literally charging what was still the going rate back in 1990. And just that alone, inflation should be double. So
Mhm.
helping people overcome those fears and realize that it can be a win-win. You can take the red pill and teach your student how to take the red pill too in some situations. Not everybody is in the poor woe is me kind of mindset that sometimes we think they are. And sometimes we make decisions based on what thinks in the wallet of the poor when we actually should be charging more and set an example for everyone to raise the bar for what they too can earn.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about with this topic too is you talked about the supply and demand idea with classical singers in particular. Um, I think one of the bitter pills that we have not yet swallowed in our world is that there just isn't very much demand. And in other words, we believe that almost like labor theory of value, that if we just show up and work hard and sing pretty, then we should get paid.
Yeah.
But the problem with that mentality, as I see it, is that it causes us to then not do the work that it takes to build demand. And so this is where I feel like singers doing the work that they need to do to build their what nowadays it's in a social media presence, if that's one way to do it, building up some kind of buzz in the community towards an event, figuring out ways to communicate to people who don't understand what it is that we do, why they should show up and spend their money. Because right now, if we don't figure out ways to get audiences to come to these things, then the money is not going to be there to pay the singers. Is that something that you think about and dwell on at all?
Yeah, definitely. Because a lot of ways it's kind of like we're still mostly our degree programs are same literally as it was back in the 70s when they were designed sometimes, especially for the performance degrees. And we're still kind of taught and trained to expect to go about, making in like it's still the last century, the way our professors and, our parents and so forth ended up making it. And we're in a totally different kind of world. And, it's impossible to have that so-called perfect career that we're kind of, trained to, have a mindset for. So we have to be open to creating new things. And the audiences are out there. You just have to be willing to offer it in the right kind of way and, not be afraid to reach out and as opposed to waiting around for some magic agent to discover you or something.
Yeah. See, okay. So that's another thing that is a pet peeve of mine. And I think that you just touched on it, maybe even diagnosed it, which is that another thing classical singers do not like to do is promote themselves.
Yeah.
We shame each other for self promotion, and that's one aspect of it. But then the other aspect of it is that I think you're right. When the way we were taught in our conservatory training or collegiate training or whatever it is that the epitome of success for a singer in our vein of singing is that someone hires you to sing at some prestigious thing, and that prestigious thing pays money, and that's where success comes from. And in almost I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but it seems to me like in the classical world we look down on people who go out and do it on their own. In other words, like if you start your own organization and all of a sudden start getting paid, that's somehow less prestigious than if some outside organization hires you to do the thing. Because we always like to say, make our Facebook announcement about that we got hired to do this, and this, but nobody makes a Facebook announcement that says, no one was hiring me, so I put on my own opera and I got 400 people to come and pay tickets. Like, no, that doesn't make a good Facebook story, but to me, like, that would be an amazing success story for an artist.
Definitely. And there are stories out there like Eric Colton, the founder of True Concord Voice and Orchestra, where I had the chance to sing when I was getting my doctorate, for example, started out of his church. And now it didn't take away from the other organizations in town. They all equally still did their flourish. Their business went as usual. And that just kept on growing to a great dynamic organization. There's, possible for anybody to create a choir anywhere and, create something great from it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I feel like I encountered that the pro group that I founded 11 years ago, it kind of had that same progression where it was just constant skepticism from people in the arts community of like, what is this thing that you're starting? And it was and I think that's frustrating. The reason that's frustrating is I personally have experienced it, but I also think, like you mentioned earlier, of building a culture within the arts community where we aren't shaming each other anymore or looking down our nose at each other anymore for trying to start their own thing. And then recognize that if one of your colleagues starts their own thing, they're going to have to self-promote. They're going to have to, or else no one will show up. And if no one shows up, then the singers don't get paid. And, and so it's almost like we shoot ourselves in the foot on this topic because we don't foster a culture of growth within the community. Do you ever, how do you feel about that? Am I off the rails?
And sometimes we forget too that these people that we're upset at promoting, they actually could be hiring us too, and vice versa. Can be a rising tide lifts all boats situation. When I was doing my entrepreneurial journey, basically one of the books I've read was by James Altucher called Choose Yourself. And one quote that stuck out with me that always helps me is just to remember that no matter what in life, there's always going to be around a third of the people who hate you or find a reason to hate you, another third who's not going to care, but another third that will like you. And there's, more than enough success to generate from those people. Just don't worry about the other people.
Yep. Yeah, I've definitely found that that's true. So let's theorize. Sounds like we agree on kind of the symptoms of the problem that we are facing in the arts community in terms of entrepreneurship and building a brand, and whether or not we can make a boat or a rising tide that lifts the boats. But let's theorize a little bit together on why do we think this is the case? In other words, what are your ideas about why it is the way it is in terms of our culture of not being very entrepreneurial friendly within the classical music world?
Yeah, I think one part of it's just the whole romanticized starving artist ideology, especially right now with people who've been born in the past quarter century. It's almost like, people who are literally worse off today than their parents and grandparents were at the same part of life. Kind of like it's been socially acceptable to just, say that you're homeless, but you're still singing, in a certain major opera house or whatever. And, it's kind of like we've normalized something that really shouldn't be normal, because we just let, the toxicity kind of build up and kind of take over our mentality, collectively in a lot of, aspects of the arts community. So that's one problem. And then, there's we just need to, give people permission to like at least start with a living wage, because it's surprising there's so many opportunities where it's like you're committing, 2 months of your life in rehearsals, every single night, but then you're like getting a $200 check at the end of the show.
Yes. Yes. Although, again, if we don't make people come if we don't figure out a way to get people to come to these shows, then there's not money to pay that living wage. I would hesitate to say it's as simple as just, hey, demand a living wage, because
exactly.
The economics doesn't really work that way. You've got to, there's got to be money in the organization's pot for that. And that's something I actually have encountered in this idea of singers, because I'm in a situation where I pay singers as well. And I facilitate that. And one of the hardest things for me to get professional singers to do is help promote. In other words, our organization is not big enough to have a PR department. In fact, if we were paying PR people, I wouldn't be able to pay the singers. So you explain to them, okay, if we're going to get people to show up to this concert, that means that everybody's out on social media, bragging about the concert, explaining why it's so awesome. You got to come hear this. This is going to be so great. It'll mean a lot to me if you would come, that kind of thing. But I think, again, we've been raised to think that as professional, fancy classical singers, that it's our job to simply show up and sing.
Yep, exactly. We have that job only mentality.
Yes, it's someone else's job to tell everyone why I'm so amazing, and that I should show up. And again, it comes back to that resistance to self-promote. I think people don't want to feel like they're bragging, or whatever it is. And so my thought for professional musicians is that what other profession can get away with that? Plumbers can't get away with that. They have to drive around in a freaking van that says I am the best plumber on the planet on the side of their van, in hopes that someone will dial the number on the side of the van, so that and we just feel like it's like oil and water for us.
Yeah, and one thing I found too is like some organizations they don't actually make enough to do enough to sometimes always invite their singers to actually do a promotional thing. Like there's so many people who would be happy for the right kind of opportunity to do another solo performance on the side that promotes the show and raises money for the organization. But they're also, the organization sometimes don't always reach out. So you just feel like you're, wasted talent in some ways. Yeah. That's another thing that, we could, bring more money. And if we just facilitate more performance opportunities, or sometimes call it a performance forum, so you don't have to pay that insurance or whatever you call it, but there's, things where people like, at your church or wherever, they would love to hear other solo stuff beyond what's just in the service. And we can't be afraid to, put that out there and, let people know about it. And also not be afraid to like tell people, yeah, we do need to get to a certain amount, of funds, please, bring, encourage other people to bring people and keep on promoting in that kind of way.
Right. I think that what you just described doesn't sound to me even like promotion per se. You could also argue that that's just advocacy. Like when you spread the word about the value of the art that you are making, and you try to convince people that it's so valuable that they should show up and spend the $20 on the ticket or whatever it costs to come hear the concert, then that's not bragging. That's advocacy. That's us doing what we should be doing as artists, spreading the word that this art form, whether it be opera or choral music or musicals or whatever it is, that it's worthy of your time. And I think that's one of the things that I'm always trying to drive home with people is, if in the world that we live in today, which is social media driven. So if people don't see the event on social media, they're not going to come. They don't know that it's there. And so one of the things that I think is really important that we do is, if I don't look excited about my art form visually on social media, why should I expect that anyone else would be excited about it? If I'm nonchalant about it and hey guys, I've got this concert, I guess you probably don't want to come, but if you want to come, I've got some comp tickets. If that's the attitude, then nobody's going to come. It has to be like, you guys, you have to come like this. Goosebumps constantly during this concert. We had our last rehearsal last night. You got to get out here tomorrow. Like, it has to be enthusiastic, and we have to drive it home. And I just wonder if in your work, and because I want you to tell us a little bit here in a second about the coaching you're doing and the helping artists, really build their brand. Do you get into this kind of stuff with people that you're helping in terms of encouraging them to get over the self-promotion hump?
Yeah, sometimes it's just, brainstorming. I tell people one assignment I'll give them, like, write down 100 people you can contact to tell them to come to this concert. You got to stretch the mind. And then, actually one of my coaches told me that I should try and have 100 conversations in a week, with people. And you don't hang up the phone until they say yes and buy something, or they hang up on you or something like that. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself, to step out of the box and, test that comfort zone with how you interact with people, let them know about what you have to offer.
Do people push back?
Sometimes, yeah, but they're just like, because we're so trained to just expect to go to the audition and expect the perfect audition to be all you need in life. And so the idea of actually doing sales, or any kind of sales or whatever, is, it's that same anxiety process all over again that you have to get over. And that's an interesting thing I found too, doing this coaching work. It's like there's so many parallels to overcoming your fears in the audition context to a sales context. It's kind of like the same kind of thing, but you're, instead of, showing off your talent and hoping you get hired for that, you're kind of hoping they accept your offer, and then they don't freak out at the price tag or whatever it might be, or whatever other resource or that it require and so forth. So it's a similar, kind of mentality game you have to get through.
Did you know that the Choralosophy podcast is entirely listener supported? So the way you support as a listener the show is by a win-win scenario, which is just the ideal situation. It's win-win, which means that if you get a discount, I get kickback. That's how it all works, right? So that's listener supported, meaning you choose to purchase those things, like a Sight Reading Factory membership, like some choir folders next year for your choir at mymusicfolders.com. You choose to buy some sheet music at ryanmain.com or graphitepublishing.com. Every time you enter the promo code Choralosophy at checkout at any of those vendors, you get 10% off. There's also Voce Vista Video, which is that overtone analyzing software that I geek out about so much. It is a must. Get it in time for school year next year to start. It is fantastic. You go to vocevistavideo.com/Choralosophy, and there you can download the software for free and play with it for 30 days. Once you decide you want to buy it, then you can enter in that Choralosophy promo code. So that's just a little behind the scenes on how it all works. I appreciate everyone's help, and without you listeners doing your part to make this show happen, it just wouldn't happen. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the show. Yeah. And the way I would think, kind of articulate that too, is the artists that I know and the artistic people that I know, many of them, I could probably think of hundreds of them, that would just bristle like crazy to hear you explain that they should be more sales oriented.
Yeah.
And I think that when I ask about pushback, that's what I wonder. Now, I guess the assumption is that if they're coming to you for help with this stuff, they already probably wouldn't push back as much, because they're reaching out to you for help, trying to build a brand and build their career in that way. But I would say that a good portion of people listening to this would probably have that aversion to the idea of myself as an educator or a professional singer, classical musician, whatever it is, that I would have a sales mentality.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Interesting aspect that I found, like, just I talk to people about, like, there's a very different mindset as far as being a successful entrepreneur versus being somebody who's in a middle class job. You don't, when you're in the middle class situation, like as I was raised with two parents who had stable full-time jobs, you always hear about how they hate the boss. So how are you going to grow up and expect to be your own boss? And then the same thing about salespeople, like, you don't trust them; they're always out to get you. And so when you have to do a sales presentation yourself, it's kind of, you're dealing with those demons in your head that have been kind of planted in there subconsciously in your childhood. So it's a lot to get past.
Yeah. And I think there's probably a lot that goes into that in our community. But I have a theory that I've run by a few people that I think there is a lot to this, and I'm interested in what you think about it too. I think a lot of the bias in our field towards being anti-entrepreneur or anti-sales as a concept is that we have become a little bit fat and happy in the artistic community because of how much of our profession has been supported by the educational institutions that we grew up in. So, in other words, I'm thinking about, like, what percentage of people who direct choirs for a living, for example, have salaries that come from taxpayer institutions like public schools or state-funded colleges. That's a very large percentage of us. Of course, then you've got some that earn income from churches, and that's a little bit different. But a good portion of our profession is supported by without the need to go out and sell to the community. In other words, that advocacy piece, we're disincentivized to spread the word about what it is that we do. And I'm always kind of drumming the horn of, to have people realize that that's not the case. We actually still do have to go out and make a case for classical music, make a case for choral music, make a case for opera, make a case for musical theater. Because even if we are relying on taxpayer funding for salaries and stuff, there are still politicians who get to decide for every year if we get to keep doing what we're doing. And so that advocacy piece never stops being important. What do you think of my harebrained theory?
Well, yeah, someone's always doing a sale at some point. The question is, are you doing it yourself, or are you relying on somebody else to do it? And one thing about entrepreneurship is that at least you're not at the mercy of somebody else. Whether or not they make the sale, you you have the power to do that yourself, as far as advocating for yourself and what your organization or whatever you're doing, has to offer the world. So it's it's a different kind of approach to it. But a lot of times we're trained to just, a lot of times we're raised to just expect to, you get the good grades and you're guaranteed a good job and you don't do anything else in life. And
Yeah.
we're in a different kind of world where those kind of jobs that we're raised for aren't as plentiful, let's just say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For the people who, like myself, who draw salaries for a teaching position, but then also do other entrepreneurial things like I do. I have had fellow educators give me crap for it to my face, um, just on the grounds that I'm not like putting all of my focus and my energy on my students. And I've had that criticism before, and I find that to be bizarre because one of the things that I try to explain to people is that I'm a better teacher by a lot because of the other stuff, quote unquote, other stuff that I do. By working with professional singers, I'm a better choir director for my students. By doing this podcast, I'm constantly engaged in professional development all the time, where I'm talking to people and asking questions and learning and thinking. And so, but there is that mentality out there of, once you got that cushy job, whatever it is, the teaching job or whatever, that your need to become an advocacy to the community at large goes away. In my opinion, I think it's those of us who have cushy jobs that we have a responsibility to advocate. We have a responsibility to go out and create opportunities in the community. I personally am a believer that I want to teach this to my students at school too. I want to teach them that music is something we're learning in the classroom, so you can go do it outside of the classroom, whether it's your job or for fun, but so that you're taking this skill that I'm teaching you and you're going to go out and sing in your church choir. You're going to go sing in some community choir. You're going to be in community theater. You're going to be getting professional choir gigs on the side while you're an engineer or whatever it is. So that's just a passion of mine. I could go on a rant about that, but yeah, I believe in that very strongly. Tell us a little bit more about this coaching thing that you do. What's it called, and what are some of the? I'm really interested in more of these like exercises or bits of advice or things that you ask your clients to do.
Yeah, basically my website's the lucrativeartist.com. That's the name. Basically, something that's antithetical to the starving artist, I guess you could say, is kind of how I picked the name out. And some people respond and think that's a loaded word, lucrative, and it's just another word for, remuneration or money making. It's not an actual rich word, but you hear it more by certain people on CNBC than you might hear on, other stations or whatever. So I guess people aren't used to the word, but in general, it help people with their relationship with the money and their mindset around that. As far as, overcoming the fear of doing the selling and asking for it and realizing you can put together the right combination of products and services that the right clients for you will actually pay for. So I help people hone in on who that ideal client might be. And then figure out what that ideal offering might be, because you can just teach, one lesson a week, or you can integrate other components to that offer, like, some other support network or other curation of resources or facilitating some other performance opportunity. And you could create a grand package that, think of yourself as like, your own little university basically. And there's a clientele out there that an ideal client will pay a good premier price for that. So not being afraid to charge, accordingly, because as long as you're giving more in use value than what you're getting in cash value, you can charge whatever you want basically, within reason, of course. Because, if a book costs $10, if that gives you a $1,000 idea, then you're not really wrong for writing a $10 book.
Right.
So help people,
Right.
with their thinking of that, and just really overcoming some of the limited, paradigms that we were raised with, because those middle class values can kind of keep you being afraid of doing some of the things you have to do to be an entrepreneur. And sometimes you have to not be afraid to, like, swallow your pride and make decisions that are not always the most glamorous or most pleasing to everybody. You might have to fire somebody, or you might have to part ways with money to hire somebody for help. And, sometimes you got to make those decisions and let go of the emotional part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Now it sounds like what you're describing is that you're teaching people how to. It was, at least when I was in college, it was called a portfolio career, to kind of put together a portfolio that is their career, whether it be, I'm assuming you deal with people who would teach voice lessons. Maybe they're also in addition, they're going for performance opportunities and understanding how to negotiate and all those types of things. And so your ideal client, it sounds like, would be the person who who isn't already kind of in a cushy job like mine, where you have a tenured teaching position. You're looking for those performance type people who might be trying to put together that piecemeal career, but then when you gather it all together, you have something workable where you can actually make a living and sustain your life.
Yeah, definitely, because we have to think multiple sources of income, basically. If you don't have that cushy job, and even if you do have the cushy job, there's no guarantee that's, there's no one, even people with tenure that out there that are losing their positions now, especially with COVID and so forth. So you have to be open to, new possibilities and things. And, there's always a service everybody can be, to render to other people that can, add to their lives and, be worth something that you can get, a decent living from. It's just a matter of being open to those possibilities and brainstorming what, the spoken wheel you could be like, and come up with different things that could be a spoke behind that main passion or thing that you're doing. You might have a podcast, you might also have a book, you might also have, like a subscription base or subscribe, newsletter, something people will pay for whatever your thoughts might be on a topic or whatever. There's so many ways, especially with the internet, sometimes we get so caught up in, being upset that certain opera companies aren't paying as much today as they did back in the 90s, but there are so many other revenue streams you can create for yourself without being at the mercy of these employers. So, it's great helping people figure out those things and, position themselves and not need to worry about the matrix as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just seems to me like it kind of goes back to what we were talking about when we first signed on, where singers have a mentality that if that you go to the audition, and if the person that is doing the audition says no, then you failed.
Yep.
And that's the end. And I would imagine the bulk of people with performance degrees, if they end up going off, or, leaving music and never coming back to it, that's probably why. At some point they did some auditions and they got told no, and they maybe lacked that entrepreneurial spirit of saying, okay, well, they told me no, but I'm going to go do it myself, and I'm going to go do something different, and I'm going to find some alternate path. It's almost like uh, the idea that if you anyone else, I guess, in any other profession, if you get a degree in something and then you aren't able to get a job in that field, uh, again, everyone else knows that you just go get another job somewhere else. You go do something else. I feel like there is a little bit of like us thinking that we're special in this area, and it sounds like what you're coaching people to do. You probably are not as blunt as me. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you are. And I and but explaining to me in a roundabout way, explaining to someone that you're not that special. If they said no, that's okay, fine, but you build it this way, and here's another way you can go around the people who say no.
There's a way to make it their loss.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So you're a lot nicer than me. Yeah. So that's okay. That's a great. I love that slogan. They told you no, and you're going to make it their loss, meaning you're going to go around and say, hey, you made the wrong call, because here's what I can do. That's powerful. Do you have?
The way I was going to say, the way the industry works these days, if you're going to make it in the big opera houses and some other organizations, sometimes it's like they got to, notice that you're worth, catching on to, as opposed to you getting accepted by them through the traditional lines. So, a lot of people who have something else going on are the ones who finally get noticed, and then they get those other big contracts and so forth. So it's not the same. It's not the same kind of, top down approach. You can do a bottom up approach to your career these days.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That sounds great. And I think maybe I'm just, my bias on this topic is really just that I am a person who roots for the underdog anyway, meaning I would love it if more of us had that mentality, that the audition is not what determines whether or not we get to be successful in the field. No one else gets to decide for you. It's not a question of who's going to let you be a successful artist. It's a question of who will stop you from being a successful artist. And I think that's huge. Like that just slight mindset shift would be so huge for people. Do you have any? Yeah, no, go ahead.
Like, during my studies and everywhere I've lived in the country, I've had a church to sing in, and people everywhere I go, they love you. So it's like I have that affirmation in my back pocket if all else fails, when the auditions don't turn out right and so forth. And sometimes I tell people, if all else fails, you can get a church job do it for that reason, regardless of the pay, because you have those people who they can grow into your fans. And even if the actual institution's not paying you enough, you might be able to get people who are members to, pay for your Patreon or something else you could be doing. So it's, there are opportunities out there.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, that's funny you mentioned Patreon, because I have a Patreon here for this show. And it was told to me in no uncertain terms when I was starting this show. I won't name a name, but I was told, do not try to do a Patreon, because choir people won't pay for stuff like this. They're not going to pay for it. And of course, I did it anyway. My thought was, well, if they don't, that's okay. I lose nothing by trying it. And, now we're coming close to 75 subscribers that voluntarily pay because they appreciate the content. And I think that's a good example of the mentality you're putting forth, which is that if you believe in the value of your product, and that the product will create value for others, then you put it out there and you offer them opportunities to subscribe, to pay, to buy the thing, to hire you, whatever it is. But again, it kind of comes back to the idea of when I said people don't want to promote the concert. If I don't act like, if I imagine Choralosophy podcast, if I were to get on Facebook and say, hey guys, I did this episode, it's all right. Like you probably don't want to listen to it, but it's about financial literacy and entrepreneurship. And I talked to this guy, and Brian, I mean, he's okay, but if you want to listen, tune in. Like, you would fail sales 101 if that's how you talked. So I just think that's awesome. I think that's great what you're doing. I have another question though.
Yeah.
So without naming names, unless you want to, can you give us any kind of like any of your favorite types of breakthroughs with people, or just a success story or something where you felt like what you did really helped somebody and that made you feel good about yourself with what you're doing with Lucrative Artist?
Yeah, one of my clients that gave me a very raving testimonial, her name's Heidi Skoke. She sang at the Metropolitan Opera years ago, and she had that storied career that we're trying to dream for. And really, all along, like when she was in high school, she basically was told classical singing was her only option, and she was not allowed to be a pop singer by a voice teacher and so forth. And now she's in her, much older, and she's more or less at a point where she's not afraid to put herself out there offering different things. So she's doing belting techniques and other crossover stuff to help classical singers likewise cross over into those genres, and overcome the fear of putting herself out there, and also realizing that she is now that person that she was paying the equivalent amount of money to as a Met singer back in the 90s. Now she can be that same caliber teacher. She's charging today's rate adjusted for inflation, kind of a thing. And not being afraid to charge that, and realizing that your ideal clients aren't going to flinch at the price if you make the right conversation and put it in the right frame of mind.
And so your role is essentially as like a coach that helps her understand that she does have that value, and to give her the permission almost to go out and say, here's what my value is, and to move herself forward in that way.
Yeah, because we all have our worth is infinite, whether we like it or not. We all have infinite worth. We have infinite potential, and sometimes we forget that, and we think we have to just do what everybody else is doing in the exact same way, and we think we can only, sometimes I joke that we're solo singers, like most of our degrees were based in solo singing, but then we kind of approach the real world like we're only in a certain choir that was designed 50 years ago, and we don't necessarily try and do other things. So it's interesting. We try to be too much like everybody else, and we don't realize that we have unique things that other people will find valuable if we're willing to seek them out and make the right offer to the right situation.
That's great. That's great. Well, I want to kind of wrap this up in this way, if it's okay.
Sure.
Just to put you on the spot, and with thinking about the work that you're doing now, and the observations that you've made in the classical music and vocal music world, what are some things that you feel like, if you were to leave us with some nuggets of wisdom, for obviously you would love it if some people jumped into your boat over there at the Lucrative Artist and asked for your help in whatever it is that they're trying to do, but how would you kind of bullet point the big picture advice that you give to clients over the course of the time you work with them, or just things that the average listener should just internalize from what your philosophy is?
Yeah, one thing to think about is with the money in general is that the money has to be there. Otherwise, your mind would not think about the money. Like there's a book by Thomas Troward called Working with the Laws. And basically, no mind can conceive of an idea if the possibility of its fulfillment can't exist. So like if you need money for something, you could rob a bank. You could, take money from grandma. You could do something else. there's, not so ethical ways to do it, but there are also other ways, if you allow yourself to make the decision first and then think about how you can get the money as opposed to thinking I don't have the money. It's kind of interesting how we make so many decisions in life based upon what we think we don't have. And we say no before we realize how we could raise the money to bring it into, existence. Like, for example, when I went to Italy and studied there for a summer 12 years ago, and I didn't know how I'd come up with all the money except expecting maybe take out more student loans or something at the next year. But instead, my home parish, I did a recital there actually it was today, 12 years ago, and raised $2,000 just, singing some of my recital rep that I did in grad school. So, the opportunities, the right people will bring the right money to you. It's a really interesting thing is, we need air, water, and money are the three top things we need in life to survive in the Western world or in the developed world. And, with that in frame of mind, we should think of it as being the third easiest thing we can get. You just got to think of the law of cause and effect and think of money as the effect, and it comes through people. So it's a matter of being of service and having something to offer to people that'll bring it to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, money is nothing more than a stand-in for value. It's a stand-in for the value, especially if, of course, I'm not going to go down the whole rabbit hole of monetary theory, but I could, namely that money used to be in the Western world based on some kind of precious metal like gold or silver or whatever, and it's not anymore. Now our money is completely based on the value of the goods and services that we are trading when we pass that back and forth. So money in real terms is just a metaphor for value that you're offering.
Yeah, it's an
It's my
idea.
time, it's your time, it's your energy, it's your product.
Yeah, it's like an idea, and in a way, like you could almost say that we all have access to the same amount because it's really in the end just an idea to measure an exchange of value.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's with a cryptocurrency or with seashells or something, there's whatever happens with the actual currencies, like there's always going to be a way to measure that value in some way or another.
Yep. And the idea that it's that, I guess that I'm trying to think of the word, the scarcity mentality that sometimes people talk about, where I'm sure that there just isn't enough money for me to do this thing that I want, which is really just a cop out essentially, because in a value-based economy like that we currently live in, the more value we create for each other, the more money there will be. That's kind of how it works right now. And so, yeah, I would love to see our artistic community jump on this ship a little bit more, because not only would they make more money individually by doing the kinds of things you're saying, but we would create a bigger pie for the whole classical music and vocal music world. Imagine if every single classical musician, choral musician, musical theater, opera, dance were out there acting like salespeople to the world, about with what it, and our entire industry would boom, because we would be convincing people to show up, which I would just love. If people get anything out of this from my rants in this episode, that's what I would love to accomplish. Well, Brian, go ahead.
There's so much more that we can be doing. We don't have to just do the same existing things. We can always create new opportunity, and the money will flow from somewhere. It's out there, and the right people will come to us and be happy to pay it, and we can have more prosperity for all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody definitely needs to go to the Lucrative Artist. I can't talk today. The lucrativeartist.com. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
.com. Okay. And of course you can find Brian on Facebook and on Twitter and all of that. And I strongly recommend seeking him out for help, especially if you fall into that category of building a portfolio that you could benefit, and of course we all could benefit from building a portfolio career, and of course becoming advocates for ourselves and our art form. Thank you so much, Brian, for spending some time with me.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you as always for sticking around to the end of an episode. I hope you got something out of that, and at the very least found it provocative and stimulated some of your thoughts about your own career potential. What is the direction of your career? Where do you see it going? And most importantly, who has to let you in order for that to be successful? And then my challenge for you as we go out would be to maybe think about ways that your career could be structured where you don't have to have anyone's permission. That's what it means to be an entrepreneur. And that's okay for artists too. It's okay for classical musicians, educators, everybody. Something that we can all challenge ourselves to do. So if you enjoyed this content or you just think that the show is in general worthy of support, there are, of course, the sponsors for the episode that you can use that Choralosophy checkout code every time you purchase from Voce Vista, My Music Folders, Sight Reading Factory, Graphite, and of course, ryanmain.com. Then, of course, there are the non-monetary ways to support. You can like, share, comment, interact, head over to Choralosopher's Facebook page and participate in conversations related to the show topics, interesting things you heard, things you want to respond to. There's all kinds of ways to do that. Sometimes you want to do it privately. You can just send me an email at choralosophy@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time.